2020 has been a year. I don't want to underplay how much of a trying time it's been for a lot of people, but it's a vibe that I'm certainly not wanting to wish upon even my worst enemies. While I'm extremely fortunate to have not had the pandemic really affect me or my friends or my family too much, I know that for myself and a bunch of my friends, it's completely thrown off our travel plans. Around this time, we here at New Game Plus would have made the annual pilgrimage to Japan to cover the Tokyo Game Show, taking in the sights, the sounds, and the sensational dishes that only Japan can bring. Hell, I wasn't even planning to go this year, let alone anytime soon, but I've been aching to get out and go out somewhere familiar once all this ends and it's safe to do so. And so, once I'm out and can go flying again, Japan is probably where I'm going next. I guess those plans to check out South Korea or Europe can wait just a little bit longer. But until then, I'm quenching my thirst for Japan with all sorts of media, and it's been an experience. So far, I've spent a lot of time watching lots of Japanese TV or movies, and even some TV shows where Japan is a big influence, and it's been working out pretty well. I've used this time to get into a heap of the Takeshi Kitano films, and they've been violent experiences, yet poignant and moody. Hana-Bi in particular might be one of the best movies I've seen in years, and I'm kicking myself that I've not watched it earlier. I've also used this time to get kinda deep into Kamen Rider, which is something I kinda started last year as a curiosity with what was then the latest season, Kamen Rider 01, and this year I've dived deep into several of the other series. Why? Well, I can. And because curiosity is a powerful motivator. I just had to know. From all this, I've discovered two things. Firstly, sometimes you just need a brightly colored, overly convoluted show as a fantastic diversion when you're exercising or just need to fall asleep. Secondly, I've discovered that I think I really like tokusatsu shows, and I am honest to God terrified the next time I go to Japan, I'm going to spend way too much money on Kamen Rider figurines. Other times it doesn't work out so well. I struggled to get through Giri Haji on Netflix, which bummed me the hell out because it sounded like a show I genuinely like. It's a British crime drama that features Japanese actors in key roles and a lot of subtitled Japanese dialogue, but the show's a slog. Its character motivation and plot's border on melodrama kind of makes sense at times, and there's far too much style over substance. Then there's all the anime I've tried to watch but have just never gotten around to it because I'm bad at watching TV, don't ask me why. Fortunately, video games have been doing just as good, if not better, a job of quenching my Japan thirst. We're at the stage of technology that it's entirely possible to create digital recreations of parts of the world that look and feel like the real thing. Granted, there's some creative choices in terms of presenting these recreations, but given the scale of what's being attempted, I'm willing to accept this. And hey, it's always kind of cool to see how a place you spent a lot of time in gets recreated into the confines of a video game. So allow me to talk about a pair of games that I've been playing that are doing wonders in helping miss Japan and satisfying my hunger to go back there. Because I can't anytime soon. One of my favorite things to do in Japan is check out baseball. There's a vibe that Nippon professional baseball games bring that I've never seen in any other sports league, and a lot of it has to do with the fandom. When people go to baseball games in Japan, they go to baseball games. I've never seen an audience get so into a sporting contest before. Cheering songs, trumpets playing, super specific chants, you name it, it's there. And they go for the whole game. It's the wildest thing, and watching games without the crowds because of COVID has been a strange and foreign experience. Which is why Powerful Pro Yakyuu 2020 has been such a delight. Or to use its full name, eBaseball Powerful Pro. So, bit of history. Power Pro is a series of baseball games that's been running since 1994, mostly defined by its unique visual style for its characters, which would make for some great figurines. However, don't let the design fool you, there's a good baseball simulation in there. It's not quite as hardcore as something like MLB The Show, but there's enough depth that it feels approachable. It's such an iconic franchise that 2K Games teamed up with Konami to actually localize a few of the PS2 and Wii games using MLB players and teams. If you spend any time with any modern baseball game, you'd feel right at home here. Throwing pitches and hitting feels great, base running and fielding takes a little getting used to, but it becomes second nature after a little bit. Power Pro excels thanks to a bevy of modes and ways to play the game. Right from the basic exhibition mode, you can choose to play a normal one-player versus CPU game, or multiplayer, or CPU only, but you can also play it as just a single character, or the coach of an entire team. Then there's the more unique modes which go above and beyond. There's a mode where you're coaching a high school baseball team. There's a mode where you're in control of a team and leveling them up as you play against other teams. You know how most sports games nowadays have a mode where you play for the story of a single athlete? It's been in Power Pro for years, and if that's not enough content, there's even a tournament mode where you can play as national baseball teams because Powerful Pro Yakyuu 2020 just so happens to be an officially licensed Tokyo 2020 Olympics game. There's a lot here. As far as making me feel like I'm missing Japanese baseball, it does a good enough job. It has all the MPB teams and stadiums complete with their appropriate advertisements. It's weird to see Gundam and Bandai Namco logos in a Konami game, but that's what's in the Tokyo Dome. The crowd noises are also super hyped and do a good job of making you feel like a proper baseball game, and if for whatever reason you feel like you can do better, you can even make your own chants and have them play in the game. Arguably the most striking thing about the game, at least compared to Western sports games, is that it doesn't have what I like to think of as a money sink mode. There's no equivalent to Ultimate Team or a mode that's designed exclusively to part you with your money that's become a staple of modern sports gaming. Now, it's certainly something that Konami is doing. It's President Pro Evolution Soccer, and there's free-to-play and Power Pro mobile games in Japan that are more or less gacha games, but it's kind of surprising and actually refreshing to see nothing like this here. Sadly though, as much as I love the game and would urge you to give it a go, it's something that I can't easily recommend for what's a fairly obvious reason. Now, playing through the game is easy enough once you know what you're doing, but getting around it can be a nightmare if you can't read Japanese. There's absolutely no English menus or in-game translation, and this being a niche product outside of Japan, there's very little way in terms of menu translations or anything to help guide you. Not to mention most guides don't really get into the text-heavy mode, so unless you like sitting down with a translation app scanning in everything, I don't know how much you'll get out of the modes that aren't story focused, and that is a lot of what Power Pro is. Which is a shame, because it's genuinely a good baseball game that bucks a lot of the trends that have made most other sports games less enjoyable. But what if I told you I was also playing another Japanese game that had baseball in it and was fully localized? Also, it's a detective game with hand-to-hand combat and Sega arcade games. See, that game exists, and it's called Judgment. Judgment is one of the more recent titles from Sega's Ryoga Kotoku Studio, the creators of the Yakuza series. It's the first true spin-off of that series, ditching all the characters and story, but keeping the setting, telling the tale of former lawyer turned detective Takayuki Yagami as he tracks down a serial killer called the Mole who kills people and takes their eyes. Intertwined with all this just happens to be a Yakuza family, a brewing gang war, government conspiracies, because I guess you kinda just gotta write with what you know. While you can look at Judgment and think it's just Yakuza but with detective mechanics, look, that's not entirely inaccurate, but I think it does the service to what it does well. You're still getting into combat, you're still taking part in some truly ridiculous side quests, but the detective stuff does wonders for helping diversify what that team does. Best of all, it's probably the most accessible game that team has made yet. You don't actually need to have played a Yakuza game to get anything out of Judgment. You can dive straight in without any difficulty. On top of that, the game actually has an English dub and multiple English subtitle tracks for if you want them closer to the Japanese or the English audio. Though where it's really clicking for me is the setting. The star of the show here is the city of Kamurocho, modeled after the real-life district of Kabukicho in Tokyo Shinjuku Ward. The striking thing is that Sega's recreation is way more accurate than you'd think. It does take some creative liberties and is smaller than the actual Kabukicho, but having spent way too much time now, it's kind of stunning how close they got. So, allow me to explain this in a way that's totally going to make sense. Trust me, just hear me out. So in the series, there's this car park right up near the Millennium Tower, the major landmark in the game. This car park is decorated with a heap of host billboards, and there's usually a side quest or activity that sees you returning to this one specific car park. So you can imagine the genuine shock when I was walking around Kabukicho a few years ago on the way to Square Enix's Artnear store, and I just happened to run into the car park and I instantly made the connection. Now that car park isn't the only instance, there's plenty of similar things like this in the other games in the series. Another one that I really like is that there's a Don Quixote store in the game that's actually roughly where the Don Quixote store is in Kabukicho. And yes, it also plays the goddamn song. Theater Square in the game is also surprisingly close to the real thing, although there's no Godzilla to truly make you feel at home. The Sega arcade is in the right place, but where it is in the real world is surprisingly analogous to an actual arcade there, and a pretty awesome one to boot. Topping all this off are product placement deals with Asahi and Ikanari Steak, where you can go purchase things like Mitsuya Cider or Asahi Super Dry, or eat at an Ikanari restaurant to recover health and gain experience. Hell, the president of Ikanari Steak is even a character in the game to extol the virtues of, well, Ikanari Steak. It's some of the most ridiculous product placement you'll ever see, but given everything else in this game, let alone this series, it strangely fits. Now, none of this is particularly new to Judgment, mind you, but it does a lot to aid in the idea of virtual tourism. The RGG team are exceptional at creating a space where what you're doing is silly, unrealistic, and ridiculous, but it's a world that's strangely familiar and accurate. It's not what Tokyo is actually like, but they get pretty bloody close. Both Judgment and Power Pro are doing an admirable job of giving me Japan when I can't actually go to the country. And if I'm going to be honest, using all this as a means to experience Japan is way healthier for me than endlessly going through my trip photos or reviewing my GoPro footage from my trip last year, or even researching new things to do if I'm ever back there. Is it a proper substitute for the real thing? God no, of course not. There's only so much that video games can do to fully recreate a real-world setting. Yet both these games are doing a fantastic job of presenting slices of Japan to satisfy my hunger, and yet making me yearn for more.